It was an ordinary afternoon as Emma skipped down the sidewalk, her steps light and carefree, the gentle breeze tussling her hair. She loved this time of day. The sky was painted in hues of orange and pink, and the world around her seemed quiet and still. Her school day had ended early, and she had been excited to get home and play with Thor, her loyal wolfhound, who would be waiting by the door, wagging his massive tail in excitement. The comforting hum of suburban life surrounded her, the soft whir of lawnmowers, the occasional car driving past, and the distant sound of children playing in their yards. As Emma passed the tall oak tree on the corner of Maple Street, she felt a peculiar sensation, like someone was watching her. She paused for a moment, her eyes scanning the street ahead. A car passed by, but the street was mostly empty. It was the kind of neighborhood where nothing ever happened. People knew each other, waved as they passed, and children played freely without a care in the world. Emma quickly shook off the feeling. She was used to walking home alone and always felt safe, but today, something was different. The air felt heavy, and the usual sounds of the street seemed distant, as though the world had suddenly gone quiet. The familiar sound of Thor's deep bark echoed from somewhere in the distance, but it wasn't enough to break the sense of unease creeping into Emma's chest. Thor was always waiting for her at home, sitting by the door with his big brown eyes watching for her return. But today, she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. She quickened her pace, the sound of her footsteps growing louder as the thudding of her heart increased in her chest. Her house was just a few blocks away now. She could see the familiar red brick of her home in the distance. It was a small house, but it was hers. The yard was lined with flower beds her mom took great care in planting, and there was a swing set in the backyard where Emma would spend hours playing. Everything felt so normal, so safe. Still, the sense of being watched lingered. Emma glanced over her shoulder, but there was nothing. She forced herself to smile, telling herself that she was just imagining things. After all, she'd walked this route 100 times before. As she reached the corner of the street, her eyes drifted to the tall hedge that separated her yard from the one next door. She paused again, feeling a strange tug in her gut. She couldn't explain it, but something about the hedge felt different today. Maybe it was the shadows stretching long across the ground, or perhaps the way the leaves rustled, even though there wasn't a breeze. She pushed the thought aside and took a deep breath, forcing herself to keep walking. But as Emma rounded the corner, she couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that followed her. There was no reason to be afraid, she told herself again. It was just a walk home, just a typical, ordinary afternoon. Meanwhile, hidden in the shadows, two figures watched Emma as she walked further down the street. The robbers had been waiting for an opportunity like this, an isolated target, someone who wouldn't be able to fight back. They had been prowling the neighborhood for days, casing homes and figuring out the best way to make their move. The quiet suburban street was the perfect setting for their plans. No one would expect anything unusual to happen here, and that was exactly why they'd chosen this place. The first man, tall and lanky with a scar running down his cheek, adjusted the baseball cap on his head, peering out from behind the thick row of bushes near the corner of the street. His companion, shorter and broader, stood slightly behind him, keeping his gaze on Emma as she walked past, oblivious to their presence. The first man motioned for the second to stay still, his eyes narrowing as he studied the little girl. She was alone. She didn't have any idea that they were following her. "She's perfect," the first man muttered under his breath. His voice was low, barely above a whisper. His companion nodded, glancing around to make sure no one was in sight. They had scouted the neighborhood earlier in the day, making sure it was quiet. This was their moment. Emma's house was just up ahead, but the robbers had other plans. The second man shifted his weight uneasily. "You sure we should do this now? She's just a kid," he asked, his voice uncertain. The first man scowled, annoyed by the question. "We don't have a choice," he growled. "We need the cash, and her parents are at work. No one will know. It'll be quick. No one gets hurt." He paused for a moment, watching as Emma continued walking, her back turned toward them. "Just grab her. We're in and out before anyone realizes." The second man hesitated, but the promise of easy money won out. He stepped forward, his eyes locked on Emma. They were so close now, so close to having her alone. He could feel his heart racing, the adrenaline of the situation starting to set in. As the two men moved silently through the bushes, the first man stayed a few steps behind, waiting for the right moment to strike. Emma walked on, unaware of the danger closing in on her. She had passed the familiar houses, her thoughts drifting back to the excitement of playing with Thor when she got home. The feeling of being watched still lingered, but she pushed it away, convincing herself it was just her imagination. She was almost home, and soon enough, Thor would be there, his gentle presence a source of comfort. She couldn't wait to see him. But little did she know, as she took the final steps toward her front yard, the robbers were only moments away from making their move. The air felt thick with tension now. Emma was almost at her doorstep. The robbers were closing in, just a few paces away from her, the darkness surrounding them as they prepared to strike. As the robbers closed in, a sudden chill filled the air. Emma's unease deepened, though she still couldn't put her finger on why. She glanced back once more, but this time, her heart skipped a beat when her eyes landed on something. Someone she hadn't expected. A large, shadowy figure emerged from the darkness, stepping silently into her path. Thor, her massive wolfhound, appeared like a ghost from the shadows. His dark coat blended seamlessly with the evening, his eyes glimmering with an intense focus. The robbers, still hidden behind the bushes, froze in place. They hadn't seen the dog until now, and the sight of him caused them to hesitate. Thor had been Emma's protector since she was just a baby. Even though he had always been calm and friendly, there was another side to him, a fierce, unyielding side that came out when he sensed danger. It was this side of him that had kept Emma safe countless times. Over the years, Thor had learned to read the world around him, his instincts sharp and unwavering. And right now, those instincts were screaming at him that something wasn't right. Emma was in danger. The robbers didn't know it, but they had made a terrible mistake. They had been following Emma, thinking they would have the chance to grab her without anyone noticing. What they didn't realize was that Thor had been quietly trailing her, just out of sight. He had been with her every step of the way, his large frame hidden in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to reveal himself. Thor's muscles rippled beneath his thick coat as he moved closer to Emma, placing himself between her and the robbers without making a sound. He was so quiet, so calculated, that it was almost as if he had been waiting for this moment. Emma's eyes widened as she saw her dog step into her line of sight. A sense of calm washed over her. Thor was always there for her, and she knew without a doubt that he would protect her. The robbers, still unsure of what to do, exchanged nervous glances. They hadn't counted on the dog. They had been expecting an easy target, just a little girl, alone in the quiet of the evening. But now, with Thor standing in her defense, everything had changed. Thor's growl broke the silence. It wasn't loud at first, but it was deep, low, and rumbling like the growl of a wild animal. His eyes locked onto the robbers, unblinking, his body tense with alertness. The robbers took an instinctive step back, their confidence faltering. They hadn't expected a dog like this, not one with the strength and presence that Thor had. Emma's grip tightened around the strap of her school bag, and she instinctively stepped closer to Thor. She trusted him. She always had. And now, with him standing so tall and protective, she felt a wave of reassurance flood over her. She knew Thor would not let anything happen to her. He never had before. The robbers stood frozen, caught in a standoff that neither of them had anticipated. The tall man, the one with the scar on his cheek, was the first to break the silence. He took a hesitant step forward, trying to size up the situation. His hand, twitching nervously, hovered near the waistband of his jeans, where he kept a small, concealed weapon. He was used to controlling situations with threats, with fear. But this wasn't what he had imagined. This wasn't a frightened little girl. This was a wolfhound. And not just any dog, but one that stood taller than most grown men, with muscles like steel and eyes that gleamed with a cold intelligence. The second man, more broad-shouldered and stockier, instinctively stepped back, his hands raised in a half-hearted gesture of surrender. "We don't want any trouble," he muttered, his voice unsteady. His gaze flickered from the towering dog to Emma, who stood silently beside Thor, her small hand clutching his leash. Her expression was calm, but the worry in her eyes was clear. She could sense the tension in the air, even though she trusted her protector. She had no idea what the men were planning, but she knew this was no ordinary moment. But Thor wasn't ready to back down. The growl that rumbled from his throat deepened, vibrating through the night air like a low thunder. It wasn't just a warning, it was a promise. Thor wasn't afraid. He wasn't about to let anyone harm Emma. The robbers could see it now, the raw power in his stance, the way his muscles tensed with controlled aggression. He was ready to act, and his eyes were locked on them with unwavering focus. His growl intensified, louder now, each rumble filled with the certainty that anyone who tried to get past him would face consequences they weren't prepared for. The tall man took another step forward, his hand still hovering near the weapon, but now he was visibly shaking. He wasn't sure if it was the dog or the situation itself that was making him nervous, but he was losing his nerve. "Look," he said, trying to sound tough but failing, his voice cracking. "It's just a dog. A big one, yeah, but..." Before he could finish his sentence, Thor moved. It wasn't a sudden lunge, but a swift, controlled shift of his weight. He stepped forward, his body nearly filling the space between the robbers and Emma. His growl became more pronounced, more threatening, and for the first time, the robbers truly felt the weight of the situation. The tall man took a step back, his confidence slipping away completely as he looked into Thor's eyes. It was as though the dog could see right through him, could sense every ounce of fear and uncertainty the man carried. The second man's breath caught in his throat as he looked between his partner and the dog, realizing they were far beyond the point of retreat. They were outmatched. Thor was no ordinary dog. He wasn't just a companion, he was a guardian, a warrior in his own right. And as the seconds ticked by, the robbers knew deep down that there was no way they could win this encounter. They had underestimated the girl, the dog, and the strength of the bond they shared. With a final decisive growl, Thor moved even closer, his body practically brushing against Emma's legs. It was a warning they couldn't ignore. "Don't come any closer," Emma whispered softly, her voice steady despite the fear churning in her stomach. Her fingers tightened on the leash, feeling the warmth and strength of Thor's presence beside her. This wasn't just her dog, it was her protector, her hero. And there was no way she was going to let these men hurt her, not with Thor by her side. The robbers stood at a crossroads, each of them caught in a mental tug of war. The air between them and Thor seemed to hum with tension, thick with the potential for violence. They had thought they could handle any situation. After all, they'd been in worse spots before. But nothing had prepared them for this. Nothing had prepared them for Thor. The tall man with the scar on his face swallowed hard. His hand still hovered over his waistband, but he wasn't sure what to do now. The dog was too close, too powerful. His eyes darted to the short man beside him, looking for reassurance, but his partner was already retreating, his back pressed against the bush as if he hoped to melt into the shadows. "Come on, man," the short man whispered harshly, his voice tight with panic. "We need to go. This isn't worth it." He took another step back, his feet scraping against the gravel, his nerves completely undone. The tall man, however, was too far gone. He was caught in the pressure of the moment. He had to act. He could still overpower a child, could still take what he needed. He took a half step forward, fingers twitching toward the gun hidden under his jacket. But the moment he moved, Thor reacted. With a suddenness that took everyone by surprise, Thor lunged. His powerful body surged forward, massive legs carrying him with incredible speed. The growl that had been building in his chest exploded into a booming bark, one that shook the ground beneath their feet. The sound was deafening, ferocious. It sent a jolt of terror through the robbers, freezing them in place. Before the tall man could react, Thor was on him, his massive form a blur of muscle and fur. The dog's enormous head came dangerously close to the man's arm, snapping through the air with an audible snap of teeth. The man stumbled backward, his heart racing, nearly tripping over his own feet. The gun stayed holstered, forgotten. The sound of Thor's teeth clacking shut was enough to make him reconsider everything. "Stop!" The tall man yelled, his voice thick with panic. But Thor was relentless. The wolfhound didn't lunge for the man to bite. He was sending a message, loud and clear. Emma, still standing several paces away, didn't flinch. She had seen Thor act like this before. She knew he wasn't trying to hurt the robbers. He was simply warning them. He was showing them that there was no escape, no way forward. With his towering presence and the sheer power he radiated, Thor was more than enough to intimidate even the bravest of men. The second robber, the short one, had already made his decision. He was no longer willing to test his luck. His eyes widened as he saw his partner struggle to keep his distance from Thor. He took a hesitant step backward, his voice shaky as he called out, "We're not doing this. This is crazy. Let's just go." But the tall man wasn't listening. His pride had been wounded, his plans shattered in an instant. He couldn't let a dog, an animal, make him look weak. "I'm not afraid of the dog," he muttered, though there was no conviction in his voice. His hand finally gripped the handle of the gun, but before he could raise it, Thor was on him again, this time with a force that knocked him off balance. Thor's head collided with the man's chest, knocking him back several feet. The wind was knocked out of him, and he stumbled, barely managing to stay on his feet. The second man, now terrified, grabbed his partner's arm, pulling him backward. "Let's go. We're done here." And just like that, the fight left them. The robbers, now completely outmatched, turned on their heels and bolted down the street, running as fast as their legs would carry them. The street, which had seemed so calm moments ago, was now filled only with the sound of their panicked footsteps echoing into the distance. Emma stood still, her eyes locked on the fleeing robbers, her heart still pounding in her chest. She knew they weren't coming back. Thor had done his job. The danger had passed. She looked down at her dog, who was standing firm, his gaze following the robbers for a few more moments before finally relaxing. His body uncoiled, the tension slowly draining from his muscles. "Good boy, Thor," Emma whispered, her voice filled with gratitude and relief. She reached down to scratch his ears, feeling his warmth beneath her fingers. Thor gave a soft grunt of approval, wagging his tail once, then turning to walk beside her. The ordeal was over, but the bond between them had only grown stronger. Emma knew that no matter what happened, Thor would always be there, standing by her side, ready to protect her when she needed it most. The robbers didn't stop running until they were well out of sight, disappearing into the shadows where they thought they would be safe. But fear clung to them, wrapping around their hearts like an iron grip. The street was quiet again, the eerie silence settling over the neighborhood like a heavy blanket. The only sound that remained was the soft thud of Emma's footsteps as she stood there, staring at the spot where the men had just been. Emma's breath came out in shaky bursts, but she wasn't as frightened as she had been before. She was used to Thor, to the way he protected her. She knew that he had saved her, just as he always did. The fear she had felt just moments ago was now replaced by a sense of awe. She turned slowly, looking up at her giant protector, who stood next to her like a sentry. His golden brown eyes softened, and he gave her a quiet woof, as if to say, "It's over, Emma." But she wasn't alone in this quiet moment. Thor's presence, though comforting, was a stark reminder of what had just happened. The reality of the situation hit Emma all at once. Two grown men had tried to hurt her. They had tried to take her, and only Thor had kept them from succeeding. The calmness that had settled in her chest was slowly replaced by a lingering unease. She glanced around, suddenly aware of how vulnerable she had felt moments ago. What if Thor hadn't been there? What if the robbers had gotten too close, or worse? What if they had come prepared to do more than just threaten? A shiver ran through her, and she hugged Thor tighter, as if he could shield her from every bad thought that crept into her mind. Thor's gentle gaze met hers, and in that instant, Emma realized that it wasn't just about the danger they had faced tonight. It was about the bond they shared. Thor was more than a dog. He was her family. He was the protector who had always been there, the one who would stand between her and any danger that came her way. He wasn't just a pet. He was her guardian, her hero. "I don't know what I would have done without you," Emma whispered softly, her voice filled with gratitude. Thor let out a soft, reassuring bark and nuzzled her hand, as if to say, "I'm always here for you, Emma. Always." The robbers had underestimated her, and they had certainly underestimated Thor. They had thought they could take advantage of a little girl, but they had no idea what they were up against. Emma couldn't help but feel a small flicker of pride at that thought. She wasn't just a helpless target, she had Thor. And with him by her side, she knew she was never truly alone. But as Emma looked up at her house in the distance, she knew that this would be a story she would never forget. It would be a story she would tell everyone when they asked about her and Thor, about how a little girl and her wolfhound had faced down danger together. A story about strength, loyalty, and the bond that couldn't be broken. And as she walked toward the safety of her home, Thor right beside her, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had learned something important tonight. She was stronger than she had realized, and with Thor by her side, she could face anything that came her way. As Emma stepped onto her front porch, she felt a rush of relief wash over her. The familiar sight of her house, the warm glow of the lights through the windows, and the quiet hum of the neighborhood all seemed to return the world to its usual peaceful rhythm. Yet, despite the calm that surrounded her, something inside Emma stirred. The events of the evening weighed on her, reminding her of how close things had come to being very different. Thor walked beside her, his massive form casting a shadow over the porch as he stood still, watching over her. Emma knelt down and gave him a long, grateful hug. He nudged his head into her chest, a gentle reassurance, and his eyes softened. There was no need for words between them. He knew exactly what she was feeling. He had always known. Inside, the house was quiet. Emma could hear the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the clock on the wall. She entered through the front door, Thor following closely behind, his paws muffled on the hardwood floors. Emma's mother had already left for work earlier in the day, and her father would be back soon. It was rare for them both to be gone at the same time, but they trusted Emma to handle things, especially with Thor watching over her. As Emma closed the door behind her, she stood for a moment, just letting the silence sink in. Her fingers still tingled from the adrenaline that had coursed through her during the confrontation. Despite her relief, the fear hadn't completely gone away. Her eyes wandered to the window by the front door, and she couldn't shake the image of the robbers. How they had appeared from nowhere, how they had almost taken everything away in an instant. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft bark from Thor, and she turned toward him. He stood by the door, his head cocked as if he were reading her thoughts. She smiled faintly and walked over to the couch, sitting down with a sigh. Thor padded over and sat beside her, his large body taking up a lot of space on the couch. Emma absently scratched behind his ears, the comfort of his presence washing over her. It wasn't just the danger that she had faced, but how quickly things had changed. One moment, the world had felt completely normal. The next, she had been staring down the robbers with nothing but Thor by her side. The difference between the two moments was clear. Without Thor, she would have been helpless. She would have been at the mercy of people who didn't care, who saw her as nothing more than an easy target. Emma's thoughts wandered to the future. What if they came back? What if the robbers hadn't been scared off by Thor? What if they were more desperate next time? She shook her head. No, she wasn't going to let fear control her. She had Thor, and with him by her side, she knew she was never truly vulnerable. Her father's car rumbled in the driveway, and she stood up, brushing the lingering thoughts away. She needed to be strong for herself, for her family. She reached down to give Thor one last affectionate pat on the head before walking toward the door to greet her father. But as she opened the door, she felt a sudden sense of calm. Whatever had happened, whatever came next, she was ready for it. Because no matter what, Thor would always be there, and that made her unstoppable. As the door swung open and she stepped outside to greet her dad, Emma looked down at Thor, who stood by her side, unwavering and strong. The worst was over, but she knew the lessons of tonight would stay with her forever. She would never forget how, in the face of danger, she had found strength, not just in herself, but in the bond she shared with her protector. The following days felt almost surreal to Emma. It was as if the events of the past night had been a nightmare, something that happened to someone else. She went to school, met her friends, and completed her homework like she always did. But deep down there was an awareness, a reminder of what had nearly happened. The robbers had come close, but she had been lucky. Thor had been there. And for that, she was thankful every minute. Emma knew that she had changed, though. She couldn't pretend that everything was the same. Her perspective had shifted. The safety of her home no longer seemed as solid as it once had. Every time she walked out of the house or went to the store, her mind would wander back to the dark figures on the street, to the fear that had nearly overwhelmed her. But she wasn't afraid. Not anymore. Thor's presence had taught her something invaluable: how to face fear head-on, how to protect what mattered most. Emma had always known that Thor was special, that he wasn't just a dog. But after the confrontation with the robbers, she realized that he wasn't just her companion. He was her protector, her constant guardian. He had kept her safe when no one else could have. That evening after school, Emma sat on the porch steps, Thor resting beside her as usual. The sun was setting, casting a warm, golden light over the neighborhood. The world felt peaceful again, the usual hum of life returning to normal. Yet Emma couldn't help but keep an eye on the street, her senses more alert than before. She didn't want to let her guard down, not completely. Thor lay beside her, his large body stretched out in the cool evening air. His steady breathing and calm demeanor reassured her. Despite everything that had happened, he was still the same dog, the one who had been there for her since the very beginning. He rested his head on his paws, looking up at Emma with those knowing eyes, as if he understood exactly how she was feeling. "You know," Emma said quietly, "I think I'm starting to understand why you're so protective of me. You just know, don't you?" She reached down and scratched behind his ears, and he let out a contented sigh, eyes half closed. As the evening continued, Emma felt a sense of peace settle in. She no longer felt the same weight of fear hanging over her. The robbers were gone, and she wasn't helpless. She had Thor, and that made all the difference. When her parents came home later that evening, they noticed something different about her. It wasn't just the calm in her eyes or the way she spoke with more confidence. It was a subtle shift, a quiet strength that had blossomed in Emma. She had faced danger, but she hadn't backed down. She had stood her ground, with Thor at her side, and she had emerged victorious. Her father gave her a hug, his arms enveloping her in a tight embrace. "I'm proud of you, kiddo," he said softly. "You're stronger than I ever gave you credit for." Emma smiled up at him, her heart swelling with pride. She wasn't just the little girl her parents had always protected. She had proven to herself that she could handle what life threw her way. That night, as Emma lay in bed, she thought about the events that had unfolded and the lessons she'd learned. The world wasn't always safe, and bad things could happen at any time. But no matter what came next, Emma knew she had something priceless: the loyalty and strength of Thor, the bond they shared, and the unwavering certainty that, together, they could face anything. With that comforting thought, Emma closed her eyes, knowing that she was never alone and never would be again. Thor would always be by her side, and that was more than enough.